Cats would be comfortable enough to lay out like that on the dashboard.
If the dashboard was big enough, I'd be comfortable enough to lay out on it.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Isaiah, thank you for that. We'll catch up with him a couple more times throughout the rest of the show. Right now, we're going to welcome our first live guest in the morning. We've got Noy Mahoney with us today, talking about Arrive Logistics getting to expand into the Texas market, which is really exciting. We're bringing some more jobs to San Antonio as well for this group of 3PL professionals.
Exactly, because we've heard stories about them expanding. I think they even had a presence here in Chattanooga, so I'm excited to get to chat with Noy about this, because this is one of those areas that we've been talking about for some time now, looking at that borderlands area, looking at that potential area of getting that expansion, that exposure into parts of Mexico, because as we know, that's just such a growing and booming area.
Absolutely. So we've got Noy with us this morning. Go ahead to kind of chit-chat about what's going on. Noy, thank you for joining us, and let's get into this. Arrive making the decision now to expand into San Antonio, and they're bringing a decent amount of their workforce into the area. What can you tell us about this expansion?
Oh, good morning. Well, good morning. Thanks for having me. Arrive's expansion into San Antonio, I think it shows, their push and focus on things south of the border in Mexico. A few months ago, Arrive acquired Chicago-based Forager, which was a company that specialized in cross-border freight and cross-border logistics. So I think now this expansion into San Antonio just furthers Arrive's, push into Mexico and their focus on cross-border freight.
And Noy, this, of course, we're going to dig into this one a little bit more, but are there any other expansions or any other offices that are getting opened up throughout the U.S., or are they really focusing in on Texas right now?
Arrive has also mentioned that they are opening an office in Tampa, Florida. And from what Arrive has said, their workforce right now is about 1,500 employees. And they said in about a year or two, they're going to double the size of their workforce. So they'll be up to, I guess, over 3,000 employees. So they're really expanding and really trying to, grab more of the market share out there.
I think this is a trend that we're continuing to see with these 3PLs, is to get into these other places and invest really heavily in their employee workforce. And we know that a lot of times right now, with labor especially, that people are still having a hard time hiring. There's a lot more jobs open than there are active employees right now. Do you see this being the same with these expansions like the 3PLs are trying to make, or are they having an easier time filling these spots because they're really desirable jobs right now?
I think working for a 3PL is a really desirable job. And, in the case of Austin and San Antonio, what I can tell you is, because I live in San Antonio, but I also grew up around Austin. Austin is a very expensive city to live in right now. And so I think what happened maybe with Arrive is that, San Antonio is about 75, 80 miles south down Interstate 35 from Austin. But the cost of living down here is about 3 to 4 times less than Austin is. So I think they'll have a easier time hiring or finding available labor employees, here in San Antonio than they would in Austin, maybe because Austin is so expensive and it's very competitive for people to find a salary that they can live on in that city, where it's not quite so hard here in San Antonio. And I think that might be the case in Tampa, Florida, too.
No, I think that's a great point there. And real quick question, I know this is the exact other area of your coverage, but is there any talks about Arrive also looking to expand into Canada, or do you know if they're just really focusing on the southern half of the U.S. right now?
I have not heard any talks about Canada. As far as I know right now, it's just here in the U.S., but one of the interesting things you mentioned about that was that Forager that I mentioned a few moments ago, they did have some business and focus on Canada. So that might be something in Arrive's logistics future. In fact, I would be surprised if it isn't, actually.
So, Noy, we know that, as you mentioned, cross-border operations are absolutely crucial right now along the Texas-Mexico border. We've seen Laredo take off. We know that the border crossings, the land border crossings, are incredibly busy. And this gives Arrive kind of a really great foothold to be close to the border, but not necessarily right there on it. Can you talk about how now they're positioning themselves strategically to get a handle on some of that cross-border freight, but without necessarily the competition of being centered directly on the U.S.-Mexico border?
That's a great point. Austin, San Antonio, and Laredo are just straight shots along Interstate 35. And, San Antonio, being in between Austin and Laredo, it's a great medium point or middle point because you have a lot of trucking companies in this area. You have also, one of the interesting is a lot of available parking spaces for trucking in this area, which is a big plus that you don't have in maybe Laredo or Austin. So I think San Antonio makes a lot of sense for a company like Arrive that really wants to expand their cross-border while having some things that attract truck drivers and employees.
And then Noy, along that, people have started calling I-35 in Texas kind of the innovation corridor when you work from Waco down through Austin, San Antonio, down to Laredo, because we're seeing a ton of autonomous companies start to run there and electrical vehicle makers start to move in as well. People and companies placing terminals strategically along that route too. And this gets Arrive also right in the middle of that innovation corridor. Do you think that we see any potential for them to capitalize on both that automation and that electrification that's coming along that corridor very soon? And could they start to roll some of that into their offerings?
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that, Kaylee, but I can't see how they do not incorporate, electrification and some of these things going on. I believe it's with, I forgot the names of the autonomous truck companies, but, most of them are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, if I'm not mistaken. But that's also not too far away. It's about 200-300 miles from where I am. But you also have Tesla in Austin, and it wouldn't surprise me if Arrive and starts working with companies like Tesla, starts working with companies like Navistar down here, but also with, like you said, the autonomous trucking companies. There's just so much going on in this area right now in terms of freight and trucking companies.
And Noy, when you're looking at San Antonio and Arrive's expansion into this, what does competition look like for them when they're trying to grow their staff? Because this is very ambitious of their hiring goals over the next 2 years. Is this going to be something that you think is going to be really something that they're going to have to really try to acquire folks from other competitors, or something that they can really kind of just hone in on this area there as well?
I think Arrive is one of the really first large logistics companies that I've heard of opening a very large office here in San Antonio. So I think right now they have the market to themselves in terms of, attracting a good labor pool. And a lot of people in San Antonio would probably be very excited to work for a company like Arrive, a logistic company, cross-border logistic company. So you're dealing with, international freight. So I think it was a really smart decision for them to open an office here.
All right, Noy, anything else that you're working on right now that's kind of big news right now? Anything else in the Borderlands from this weekend?
A story I broke late Friday, probably not a lot of people saw it because it was so late Friday evening, was about a truck driver's strike going on in Houston, Texas, with a company called HUD Transportation. And about 80 of their drivers were on strike all last week because they were demanding about a 20% pay increase. And from what they told me, the company only came back and offered them 8%. So that strike was going on from Monday through Friday. I haven't had a chance to check with them this morning to see if it's still going on, but I thought that was a really interesting story.
Interesting story indeed, Noy, and I'm sure we'll probably have you on again to follow up on that developing, because it definitely sounds intriguing. But thank you so much for joining us this morning, because this Arrive news, I think, is just beginning.
Awesome. Thank you so much.